eyes out for the perfect spot, because you're at the card pool. I'm your host, Stu Galetta.
And I'm Kyle Robertson.
And today we are starting off Season 2 again with our Hidden Gems, my section, that is, from Lorwyn.
And again, this is part 2 of our 2-part Hidden Gems review here. We'll also, next week, check out the top 10 money cards of Lorwyn as well. But without further ado, Stu, I'm looking forward to getting to know your top 10 from this set, so let's start off this review.
Thank you, Kyle. That is one heck of an entrance right there. So let's start off with one heck of a card. My number 10 is going to a card named Fairy Trickery. It costs 3 mana, 1 generic, and double blue for a tribal instant Fairy. Counter target non-fairy spell. If that spell is countered this way, remove it from the game instead of putting it into the owner's graveyard. This is a cancel that has a very specific tribe type, but does more than that just for the simple fact that it can exile it. Now I know what you're thinking. There are commanders out there that are fairies, and Kyle, I'm sure you could name a few to boot, but it's not very common you see a whole bunch of fairies in the game. One of the best staples I could think of would be Glenalandra. Now, not being able to counter a card like that, it would sure stink, but as for a card that's just generic non-fairy, this is something very serviceable.
Like most of the tribal instants and sorceries, this is good mainly because it can be tutored, especially in this creature type by things like Fairy Harbinger, for example. It's not quite as good as something like Crib Swap or Nameless Inversion, in my opinion, because those are removal and this is just a counter spell. As we all know, counter spells don't really do anything once something hits the board, but it is still nice for that tutorable status. Also, you have to keep in mind this isn't just a tribal cancel. This is actually a tribal dissipate because it exiles the card that gets countered, which is obviously much better than having it sitting around in the grave for it to be recurred in some form. I would also argue, though, that it's not quite as good as something like Hinder or Spell Crumple, which put the countered card back into the deck. I think, while that may seem counterintuitive, that can be even more powerful because then they can't even fetch it out of the exile zone. They have to burn another tutor in order to try and get it back. I would argue that might be a little better, but still, this is pretty cool to have a nice, well-costed counterspell that is tribal.
Oh, I appreciate it, Kyle. And I mean, honestly, hearing you say you don't like a counterspell, you're a blue player. How dare you?
Well, we're going to get to more in this list that I'm like, did we switch bodies or something? But
maybe a little bit. Who knows? But get out of my head, Kyle. All right, so going on to my number 9, Kyle, would you like to introduce it?
Sure will, Stu, and we're going to go on to a card called Hoarder's Greed. This is a black sorcery, shifting gears here a little bit, and it costs 4 mana, 3 colorless and 1 black. You lose 2 life and draw 2 cards, and then clash with an opponent. If you win, repeat this process. Now, we haven't really explained any of the clash cards from Lorwyn yet, so here's what that means. Each clashing player reveals the top card of his or her deck, and then puts that card on the top or the bottom. Now, a player wins the clash if their card had a higher converted mana cost than the other. If there's a tie, nobody wins the clash, obviously, in that case. So, Stu, tell us why you think this card is deserving of your top 10.
So the first card that popped in my head in comparison was a card like Sign in Blood, and that is a very strong card in Magic, and it's only niche for solely being in black, for the fact that it has the double black mana cost. So I was like, this is kind of its bigger brother in a sense, except it can do a little bit more because it has the ability to keep going and keep going. But also remember, in clashing, you reveal the card. After it's revealed, you can choose to either leave it on top or put it on bottom. You also inherently get a free scry as well. But not only that, another player is televising what they have. Now, if it's a land and they don't want it, and they put it to the bottom for some other junk and they put it to the bottom, that isn't the case. You just kind of help speed them up a little bit, which could be argued for being bad. However, if they go ahead and reveal something that is a combo piece, like a Craterhoof Behemoth, for example, everyone's going to take note. Everyone's going to be concerned. And that player, it may not even be at that point in the game, but that player is now viewed as a threat. So it can have some interesting plays. And for cards like Sign in Blood, they're one-shot effects. I like something that can be a little bit more impactful or get more for what it can be. And this is a card that can grow.
Well, I'm not a huge fan of this card, Stu, I'm sorry to say, because Actually, there's a number of reasons, but one you just elaborated on. It's actually not all that great when you just have a one-shot sort of draw effect on a card, in my opinion, especially when that's all the card does. I do like the fact that the added scry does tack on a little bit more value there, but for losing 2 life and 4 mana, drawing 2 cards just doesn't really do it for me, especially if there's not some kind of other effect tacked on, or if this isn't at least on the body of a creature. I'm not really a huge fan of straight-up drawing effects unless they're easily broken, aka Blue Sun Zenith, or they're recurable, like something like Phyrexian Arena. Now, that's value right there. This, I'm not so sold on.
Oh, I totally agree with you, Kyle. But the reason I liked about it is it is a little bit unique because you get the scry. And the thing that really shined in my head for that was a card like Grenzo as a commander. Grenzo, for those who don't know it, loves dealing with the bottom of the deck rather than the top. So being able to possibly get some value and get value again from that is really good. And that's something in which you would want to use this card over Sign in Blood for. Now, it's a little niche, and I will agree with you, Kyle, it is. And I'm personally not a fan of those kind of one-shot effects. But again, you can choose a player that you get this with. So if you are playing politics, you can make it so that a teammate can get that as well. Or if you know another player has a low CMC build, you know that you are probably going to get the advantage on them.
Well, and also remember that it says clash, and if you win, repeat this process. You can do that any number of times. If you keep winning clashes, sure, you're going to keep losing life, but you're also going to keep drawing cards. This actually reminds me of the upcoming Demon Lord Belzimlock from Dominaria, because it actually is kind of a very similar effect there.
Yeah, and that's what really made this card shine for me, for the fact that it can self-propel. Now, again, it can whiff after the first time, and that feels bad. You'd rather a Sign in Blood in that case. But again, if you're trying to get this to keep going and going off again, that works. Also, one thing to note is if the effect does keep going, that's not casting it again. So there's no way for them to counter it or to make it so this stops going. So if you have an ability to keep putting a card on the top of your deck, and again, this is black, Reanimator, you can put stuff to the top of the deck, you can inherently draw a lot of cards for nothing at all, and that is an easy combo play.
That's true, but I'm going to rephrase. I don't really believe in card draw if that's all a card does, and we're actually going to go back to this multiple times probably in the course of this video, but I think moving on to a card that I actually really do like. Stu, do you want to tell us about this next one here?
Of course, Kyle, especially if you like it, because I'm surprised it is a green card. And my number 8 is a card called Root Grapple. It costs 5 mana, 4 generic, and a green for another tribal instant that is a Tree Folk. And it reads, destroy a target non-creature permanent. If you control a Tree Folk, draw a card. So the first thing, again, that pops into my mind, I'm always going to say this example because if these cards can compare to something that I know is good, I'm going to keep bringing them up. And this one is Beast Within. That is a staple in green for how easy it is to remove everything and pretty much not really give your opponent an advantage. This is the same way. Inherently, you can destroy anything but a creature. And again, green loves its creatures, so it makes sense in this effect. But that's artifacts, that's enchantments, that's planeswalkers and lands. So inherently, you can remove all the stuff that people typically need to dig for any kind of removal. And this is 5 mana, so a little steep, but you're in green. Green can grow, and this really isn't something that would be played on turn 5. If you do the right kind of ramp, this could be turn 3, turn 4, etc.
Yeah, just like you were saying, Stu, this mimics some of my favorite cards in green, like Beast Within, and even Woodfall Primus, because this is pretty much the exact same effect, just on an instant. The fact that it is an instant, too, is also really good and kind of rare for green, because green does get this kind of destruction sometimes, but usually not at instant speed. So this is a real double whammy in that sense. Also, the fact that, as we said, it's a tribal card, easy to search, blah, blah, blah. We've talked about this before. But it tacks card draw onto it as well, possibly, which is really interesting if you're playing a deck like Doran the Siege Tower that is kind of based around Tree Folk.
Oh, totally. And again, this is a card, it's in green, but it doesn't play as green, and that's why I really like it. This almost has that black or bluish kind of hybrid of a child from it. So, and it's, again, something I've never really seen played, wowed me going through the set, and had to just take note of it.
Yeah, I wouldn't normally play this over Beast Within, for example, because it doesn't really add anything except more mana cost for you. But if you are playing a significant number of Tree Folk in a deck, or just a Tree Folk commander, I would give this serious consideration.
Well, and also, again, you're doubling on effects. And again, Commander is a singleton format, so if you can double down on a good effect that is decently close to what the other one was, yeah, you should definitely put it in there as well.
Honestly, I would rather run Woodfall Primus, though, over this card because you get the same effect, but it's on a giant creature's body, too, and the persist notwithstanding, it's still just better for what green likes to do, in my opinion.
True, but if you need a lower CMC, this could be half a Woodfall Primus if you need it. But enough about this card, let's keep going on.
All right, well, we're getting back in my wheelhouse here. I see you've chosen a blue card here, Stu, for number 7.
I did, Kyle, and I feel like you might be on the fence with this one as well. So right here for 7, we have a card called Fathom Trawl. It costs 5 mana, 3 generic, and double blue for a sorcery. And it reads, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal 3 non-land cards. Put the non-land cards revealed this way into your hand, and put the other ones on the bottom of your library in any order. So the first card that really popped into my mind on this was a card like Fact or Fiction. And inherently, this is a different style of Fact or Fiction. It isn't an instant, which is a downside to this, but you get 3 cards. So if you do the math right there, that's a +2 for your hand. Fact or Fiction can sometimes give you a +2. Again, that's if you choose the pile that has 3 cards. Typically, your opponent's trying to make the pile that has 2 cards to be more insightful for you to pick rather than the 3. But the fact that this is 3 cards that are just based off of whatever the top of the deck is really strong. And honestly, if you think about it, how hard is it for blue to go ahead and arrange the top of the deck? It's very simple, and it has a whole bunch of cards that actually reveal the top of the deck too. So you can dig deep and really have no drawback on it.
Well, and the reason I am kind of on the fence for this one, Stu, exactly like you said, because I restate my point about not liking card draw when it's the only thing on a card. But this one makes me really stop and think, and I have played with the idea of using this card in certain decks because, like you said, it is a guaranteed bonus for you. And it removes those really annoying floods of lands where if you use something like a Blue Sun Zenith to draw a lot of cards, if half of them are lands, that kind of feels bad, right? Fathom Trawl will never, ever give you that problem, unless, of course, you really want lands, in which case you might be in trouble.
Oh, that is true. But another card that I always think that this can go really well with is Long-Term Plans. And we've talked about this card in our past segments, but it is a card that makes it so that you can tutor for any card, which blue really doesn't have in Magic, and it's third from the top. At the very least, you can get that card if the other 2 aren't lands on top. So this is a way to kind of combo that out to get a specific card that you need. Granted, you need a lot of mana for that, but it can happen and it can work with you. And plus also, Sensei's Divining Top's an artifact that goes in almost every blue deck because it's an artifact, or even Scroll Rack. So if you can go ahead and move some stuff out of the way, this can, again, change the top, make it so you can filter out your hand a lot better, and can be utilized in more ways than one.
Yeah, again, I'm not really sure how I feel about this one, Stu, but I am a much bigger fan of this rather than Hoarder's Greed because, like we've mentioned already, you are guaranteed to get some value out of this.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But enough of blue. I had to just touch it for a second, Kyle, but I have to go right back into the supreme color Magic, green.
Fine.
So my number 6 is going to have to go to a card called Woodland Guidance. It costs 4 mana, 3 generic, and a green for a sorcery. Now, this one has a bit of text, so bear with me, please. It reads, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Clash with your opponent, and we just went over through the clash, so reveal top card. If you have a higher CMC, something additional will happen. But if you win the clash, this is the interesting part. Untap all forests you control. Exile this card from the game. So this is a very unique effect. Now, again, we see in green the effect of bringing any card back from the graveyard, either to the field or to the hand. So that's not the part that really shines on this for me. And in fact, it's a little more high-costed than the cards we typically see, like an Eternal Witness or a Recollect, for that example. This would be something really good in like a Titania deck. If you can win the clash, you can go ahead and get a lot of mana from this. Inherently, you could net a lot of mana. And that's what you see with cards like Seedborn Muse. Being able to constantly get value out of lands you just got value out of really makes it so you get an advantage. And green needs all the advantage that it can get. Granted, it is chancy, but I've never seen this card, and it seems like it's good, but it seems like it's niche, and honestly, I just had to mention it because I just was baffled about it.
Yeah, it's probably only good in a mono green deck because untapping all forests is usually only basic lands we're talking about there, and you're not really going to have a high concentration of those in a 2 or more colored deck. The fact that it can get any card back, like you said, is very powerful. But again, why wouldn't you just play something like Eternal Witness instead? I mean, sure, you might not get as much swingy upside as this card can provide, but at least it's a sure thing, and at least it has a body on there too. Plus, the fact that Woodland Guidance gets exiled after it gets used once means you can't really abuse it like you can cards like Eternal Witness, for example.
Oh, that is true, but again, you can make it so you can run copies of certain cards and stuff like that. But one deck that really spoke to me out that it could really shine in is Patron of the Orochi. Now, this is a very unusual kind of green commander that we see, and honestly, I've seen almost nobody run it, but it has tacked on it the ability to go ahead and untap all forests. So this is something that would synergize very well with a deck like that, just for the fact that it's going to be running a lot of forests, it's going to be tutoring a lot of basic lands into play. So at this point, if you don't get the clash, you can go ahead and just return any card you need back from the grave. And again, green needs all the advantage it can get to stay up with everyone else. So being able to get a Beast Within back to your hand is really, really strong. So it's not something to rule out for that effect. But again, the real money of this card is the clash. Again, you get a free scry that you will guaranteed to take advantage of. And again, green, how hard would it really be to have the higher CMC? Pretty simple. So you should be able to untap all your forests.
I guess that's true. And also, I do kind of like the fact that untapping your lands in preparation for winning a clash and potentially a powerful card coming up does kind of synergize well together, especially if you can draw that card quicker than your next turn. So yeah, maybe there is some options going on here.
And unlike the other one I mentioned before, again, green does tutor a lot of creatures to the top of the deck, and the best prime example is Worldly Tutor. Play a Worldly Tutor for 1, pay this for 4, 5 mana swing, you just got all that mana back. And also make it so that you are sitting more pretty. Go ahead, get that card back into your hand somehow that you put on top. Let's say it's a Woodland Primus from our example before. Oh yeah, you'll be doing really, really well.
Well, we've talked a lot about card draw already in this segment, it seems, but now, Stu, we're finally going to come to one that I like. Now, this is the prime example of what card draw should look like, in my opinion.
Well, take it away, Kyle.
All right, number 5 on Stu's list of hidden gems from Lorwyn here is Muldrifter. Going back to my favorite color, blue, this is a 2/2 flying creature, an elemental at that costs 5 mana, 4 colorless and 1 blue. And when Muldrifter comes into play, draw 2 cards. Now, it also has the Evoke ability for 3 mana. We kind of discussed Evoke in the last video, where you can play the card for a lower cost, but if you do, you sacrifice it as soon as it comes into play. In my opinion, second only to Shriekmaw, this is probably the best Evoke creature in all of Lorwyn.
No
way. Oh, come on. I tend to like removal a little more than I tend to like card draw, but drawing cards is really cool. And like I said, this is the exact template for what good card draw looks like. Card draw on a body, and especially an evasive one and also very good blocking one because it flies. Come on, that's just really good. Sure, 5 mana for a 2/2 might not be the greatest rate ever, but drawing 2 cards is really good. Also, if you just cast it for its evoke cost, it's like a divination, right? Pretty good card, all things considered. I wouldn't play divination, but this I absolutely would play for all the synergies that we've talked about before.
Yeah, you pretty much got it all down, Kyle, and that's the reason I love this card. And it works so well in so many different types of decks, and this is a blue staple. If you need to draw cards, you have the Locust God where this can go into home. If you run a Blinks type deck, you have Rune, Brago, all the etceteras. Also tribal, elementals. There's tons of elementals and tons of legendary elementals in which this is home to. So you can definitely go ahead and put this in a lot of decks.
And this is even still a competitive card. It sees play in Modern sometimes, for example. So, hey, why not play this thing? It's good in the early game. It's good in the late game. That's a prime example of a good card to me. It's such a staple across various formats, and everybody knows this.
Yeah, and it's not as much as a hidden gem, but I felt like I had to talk about this card for just exactly how powerful it is. And if you didn't know about it before, embrace it, and I guarantee you'll love playing with this card. But onto a more unseen card for my next one, being at number 4. We're talking about a card called Dream Spoiler Witches. It costs 4 mana, 3 generic, and a black for a fairy warrior creature with a 2/2 body. And it also has flying. But the effect that I really want to take note on with this is whenever you play a spell during an opponent's turn, you may have target creature get -1/-1 until the end of turn. So this is a card that can make it so it's an alright flyer, it's a chump blocker, it goes into synergies with tribes like fairies and wizards. And wizards are a big tribe, but fairies especially this is really good in because being able to play stuff on other people's turns is really big, especially if you look at a lot of fairy commanders. They have a very strong control builds. You see Iona, but also you see fairies that also have flash. You have Fairy Harbinger, you have Spell Stutter Sprite, and even commanders like Widewind, the Biting Gale. So this isn't something too hard to make it so you're casting things on your opponent's turn. And if you are also doing a blue-black fairy build, you're going to be running counter spells, and you always play those on other people's turns. You can also run kill spells like a Doomblade or a Reckless Spite and all this other good stuff. So being able to possibly kill one creature and then another is really, really serviceable, especially with small, tiny commanders that exist out there.
I do kind of like this card, Stu, but I'm very much on the fence about it. I think it's a very niche card, and I mean like very, very niche card, way more than a lot of other ones even that we talk about in these segments, because it's cool, but I think you have to really jump through so many hoops to make it good, because especially in a game like Commander, I think the bonus is just way too small for this to really matter in most games. Unfortunately, although I really, really like it, the pool of things you can play during other people's turns is just small enough, and the tribal synergies and things like that narrow enough to make this just not the greatest card to use, in my opinion. This would probably be a lot better in a more competitive format where you can play multiples of different fairies, especially like 4 Spell Stutter Sprites and 4 Mistbind clicks in a deck. Yeah, in that case, I could see this card being good. But I guess another way you could use this is with something like Vidalcan Orrery or Leyline of Anticipation. So by giving everything flash, you could certainly double, triple, or more up on this kind of ability. Then it might be good.
I almost wish this was just a blue fairy, though. It was like a Rashmi Eternity's Crafter deck. That would be perfect in there. But, like, again, it's black. You gotta go through hoops like you did say. So it all depends on what else you're throwing in there with it. But I just wanted to bring it up because it's something, again, you can make it so that spells that are already good even better. In a deck like Hirobi, Death's Whale, it just makes it so that you can go ahead and machine gun creatures down with just little tiny effects.
Yeah, certainly against decks like token decks, this is probably a much better card, but I think that the Commander deck quite hasn't been created yet that really uses this to its full potential. It maybe something will at some point. Widewind is kind of a step in the right direction because it is a fairy and has the same kind of effect, but there's just not a ton of power there. So maybe at some point something will come out that makes this a little bit better.
But moving to a card that has an obvious power level, and I mean real obvious. This number 3 is something I've never seen, and I should be seeing more of it. It's called Kithkin Morning Caller. It costs 3 mana, 2 generic, and a green for a Kithkin Scout with a 2/2 body. And it reads, whenever an attacking Kithkin or elf is put into a graveyard from play, you may draw a card. This is a very serviceable card in 2 separate types of tribal synergies, both Kithkin and elves. And in green, there isn't a lot of card draw. Most tribal cards, they only work for one tribe. This one doesn't. Now, Kithkins aren't exactly the most seen cards in Commander. Elves. That's what really makes this thing shine. Whenever an elf is put into a graveyard from play, that is awesome. Especially if you think about it, you're attacking with a whole bunch of little token armies. They're going to die. But this now makes it so that when your opponents go ahead and block them, they are inherently giving you more gas. You're drawing cards for each one. So let's say you have a token army of 10, or not even just tokens, just elves out on the field. You have a Llanowar elves that you're going to attack with because you're really close to giving it in game. Or you're going ahead and making so you can just devastate people because there's some sort of whatever on the field. Now you're getting a card for each one that dies. How many cards could you draw in one attack set from this? 5, 10? I mean, with Rise the Redeemed at the helm, oh my god, you could really get a lot of cards in your hand.
Yeah, this reminds me of Skull Clamp in a lot of ways, and we all know what a broken card Skull Clamp is, but of course this isn't quite as good because it only works for certain tribes, and it doesn't really go off on its own. You need to attack with this thing for it to get better. It encourages, though, those all-out attacks that a lot of times you would be nervous about because, oh no, I'm going to get chump blocked and lose some of my creatures. Well, not in this case. You're actually going to benefit from it by drawing cards. Card draw in green is obviously good, and working with Kithkin and Elves, which are relevant token-based weenie kind of tribes, really makes this even better. However, I do sort of have a problem with this because you have to attack and they have to die in order to get those drawn cards. But still, it couldn't very well be just whenever one of them dies, you draw a card. That would just be way, way, way too powerful.
Yeah, they had to make this a lot weaker, especially for a card that isn't a rare. Like, this is something, again, it is a good, solid support card that just makes it so if you are falling behind, that's not the case anymore.
It's also one of those weird tribal cards, like in this case, Elf Tribal, that's not actually an elf, so go figure on that one. I'm not sure if I want to stick this in any given Elf Tribal deck, but it's a consideration.
Definitely. And also the good thing to note is that this thing also works on itself. It goes ahead and attacks, it dies. You still get a card from it. So most cards that you see like that are usually everything else. I mean, inherently, it kind of stands good on its own.
Sure does, Stu, but speaking of standing, I think this next card deals with standing tall above the rest, sort of.
Oh yeah, you are walking tall with this card. My number 2 is going to a card called Favor of the Mighty. Now it is a 2-drop, 1 white and 1 generic tribal enchantment for giants, or so it claims. And it reads, each creature with the highest converted mana cost has protection from all colors. So it's a very simple card, and it's very low costed, especially for giant big creatures. This goes ahead and makes it so that Voltron strategies are scary good, and I mean scary good, for the fact that they are protected from all creatures. The only thing that can truly block them are the Void, Eldrazi, or artifact creatures that still don't have a color. And it has to be the biggest creature too. So again, let's say someone board wipes and something's out on the field. Alright, whatever's there for right now is fine. But you don't have to worry about wasting removal on it or something to make it so it's susceptible to being hit, because just go ahead and play a creature that's a little bit bigger, and now all those gains are gone. And if you think about the biggest creatures out there that go ahead and win games, you have Elish Norn, you have Avacyn, you have Blightsteel Colossus, and I mean, name any Eldrazi Titan. Giving them all the abilities of protection from all colors, it's almost making them pseudo-progenesis, just for the fact that they can now swing and not be blocked. They can block and not take any damage. They can't be targeted. And it just makes it get even more and more nutty as the game progresses.
Yeah, I really don't have too much else to add, Stu. You said most of it. This is very interesting, and it's the first tribal enchantment that we've seen. So once again, more card types that are easily tutorable. So that's very, very interesting here. And giants, you don't really see tribal giants getting played a lot, but hey, I guess it is a possibility. This does work with a bunch of different commanders, and when we were talking before, you actually mentioned Lycia Sanguine Tribune as one that might actually work with this. Really obscure choice, and one that I've never really known what to do with, but I was like, yeah, that actually would work with this kind of well, even though it's obviously not a giant. So there are certainly cards out there that can make this pretty good, but I would caution that it can end up helping other players more than you. It's kind of a chance thing like that.
So you would have to be able to watch the benefits that you're giving your opponents in that case. But again, just for 2 mana, you play this late game, you're inherently giving a Russian roulette kind of style of Spectral Ward to any creature. Now, provided if you stay on top of this, you're fine and there's nothing for you to worry about. But also, even if you're not, you can go ahead and ruin an opponent's plays. If they need to target a creature with something that is with the same color for an aura or for, I don't know, a colored equipment, if you're playing a deck like Saram, they're not going to like this, especially if Saram is the biggest creature, because they can no longer throw auras on him. So it can muddle plays very well as opposed to making them way better. So very unique and almost a chaos card in white.
That's very interesting, Stu. Good point. I didn't really think of that. But speaking of chaos cards and cool cards, oh man, this number one of yours I really, really like. Can we please talk about this now?
Yes, Kyle, I won't keep the anticipation lingering. Now, this is another enchantment on my list. It's called Ashling's Prerogative. It costs 2 mana, a generic and a red, and it's an enchantment, like I said. Now, as this enchantment comes into play, you name either odds or evens, and 0 is even in this case. And based off of which one you chose, the creatures with that converted mana cost that you named, they have haste, whereas the others come into play tapped. So this is a very unusual haste enabler, but also kind of board disabler that is a global enchantment for everyone. And it's just baffling to see a card like this for 2 mana. I've never seen this card played, and honestly, I would hate playing against it. Red loves its haste-making engines. You have cards like Anger, which are the most iconic, but then you also have newer ones like Hammer Perforos and Fervor, and the list goes on and on. But this is something that costs less than all of them, and you don't have to have a combo to get it going. You can go ahead and play this, and you're sitting pretty. You're slowing your opponents down, and based off of what kind of deck you're building, there might not be any minus for this for you.
Yeah, this is kind of a great card. It comes out very early in the game, very aggressively costed, which I really, really like because it can start churning out haste creatures basically on turn 3, if not before. And depending on whether your probably commander is odd or even is going to influence your decision on whether you pick odds or evens. I think before shoving this card in any given deck, you have to give thought as to the converted mana cost among your creatures. Like if you have a certain deck where you have more odds than evens and your commander is maybe the opposite of what your entire deck has, you might want to think about this a little bit more. But hey, if your commander is even and you see you're hitting the 2s, 4s, and 6s heavily, this might be a great card to put in there. This came well before the only other card in red that I've ever seen with this kind of effect, which was Urabrask the Hidden from New Phyrexia. And Urabrask the Hidden is a great card, and we all know what a monster that thing is. So this is somewhat less powerful because it's not a creature, but still, it can be really, really cool.
Well, actually, I think it's more powerful because it's an enchantment. The creature can die. This has a lot harder time to do it. And again, an enchantment in red, you don't really see very strong ones like that typically played a lot. And also, it shuts down token armies. If you choose odd and they go ahead and they have to win by tokens, that token army might not even need to be there because it's not doing anything. It can't block. It can't do anything the turn it comes in. So even if it had haste, it's gone. Krenko Mob Boss? Why have I not seen this in that deck? Call evens, Krenko has haste, he taps. Those tokens have haste. They come in, they tap. That makes Krenko possibly even just the turn he comes in a game ender.
Yeah, a red blind obedience plus Hammer of Perforos or Fervor or something like that. What?
Yeah, it breaks the mold really for what red typically does, but it kind of doesn't. I'm baffled. Like, why have I really not seen this? And this isn't even a $1 card. Like, this is something that does so much for whatever it is you're putting it in.
Now, see, I have seen this card played a couple of times, Stu, and like I said, it's a great card, and like you said, more people should play this because I just feel like it's a really fun and kind of awesome option to have here. Great number one choice, really.
I appreciate it, Kyle. So that is my last card, and it is going to be the end of our pool time for today. And if you really did like these cards, be sure to check out Kyle's previous, in which he chose the opposite of my kind of style.
And next time, we're also going to be checking out the top 10 money cards from Lorwyn, so stay tuned for that video. If you like the toys we've been playing with today, let us know if any of them surprised you or could make their way into your decks. You can let us know in the comments down below, or you can reach out to us on Reddit at MTG The Card Pool.
Or you can also tweet it at us at MTG The Card Pool, or throw it up on our Facebook page in the link down below. I'm Stu Galetta.
And I'm Kyle Robertson, and we'll see you next time at The Card Pool.